Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to Biology 1. We're up to Chapter 13. Trying something different, seeing if a little in person here is better than just listening to me drone on. In the last chapter, Chapter 10, we were talking about viruses. Again, a topic that's very close to everyone's mind right now. We're going to move away from viruses and we're going to move on and start talking about natural selection. A couple chapters ago, we talked about Mendel's 5-point hypothesis. Mendel was the Austrian monk who did the work with pea plants to determine how to determine how traits are inherited from parents to individuals. How these traits get inherited from parents to individuals has everything to do, from parents to children, has everything to do with evolution. Everyone should know the name Charles Darwin. Darwin did the primary work on the theory of evolution, though Darwin himself never used the term evolution. Darwin used what was called descent with modification. He wrote the book on the origin of the species. I haven't actually read it myself, but I had a professor in college who read it, and he said it was the single most boring book that he ever finished. He said he had read other books that were more boring, but none that he finished. When Darwin was only 22, he was hired on to be the ship's naturalist for a trip that was supposed to be about 6 months long, I think. 22. Think about that. 22. How old are you? Are you 18? Are you 20? Are you 22? He hired on to be a ship's naturalist, to leave home and to be gone for good. He knew he was going to be gone for about a year. It turned out he was gone for 5 years. The name of the ship that he was hired was the HMS Beagle. Interesting little trivia question. What was the name of Darwin? The ship that Darwin was on. It was not his ship. What was the name of the ship that Darwin was on? The Beagle. The HMS Beagle. The goal was to catalog plants and animals around the South American coast. As I already said before, the trip was extended by quite a lot. As we see on the next picture, we can see where Darwin actually went. There's a picture of Darwin. They started in England, in Great Britain. You can see they came down and they hit the South American coast, went all around the South American coast for a while. And they went back up the South American coast, and then they hit this spot right here. Oh, it's not that he was out to sea for 5 years and they never went to land. They went to land many times, which each of these points means. They stopped, and they actually spent probably several days, if not more than a week, at each of these points, probably several months if he was gone for 5 years. Darwin went around the South American coast. He's trained as a geologist, but he was the ship's naturalist. It was his job to catalog the plants and animals that they saw. Again, we're talking about in the early to mid-1800s. They were still trying to figure out what the plants and animals were in South America. The important thing is these islands right here. These islands right here are called the Galapagos. I hope you've heard of the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands, this is where Darwin saw the finches, this is where he saw the great tortoises. This is where Darwin got his inspiration for on the origin of the species, where he got his inspiration for what we now call today evolution. A couple things to note about the Galapagos. The Galapagos are volcanic islands, which means that they were formed by a volcano. The reason why that's important is because all of the rest of the land that we see here, this land is ancient. It has been here for literally hundreds of millions of years, and really longer than that, in some cases a lot longer than that. But if we have these islands that are formed by a volcano, what that means is this is new land. This is new land that has never been colonized before. This is new land that has no life on it. So the life that did get there was able to grow without any kind of competition. It's also important to note the distance between the nearest major source of nearest landmass, South America, and the islands right here. And you go, well, it's not that far apart. But look, this is how far apart the Galapagos and South America is. Look at North America. We're here, right, in Georgia. We're saying that the difference between the Galapagos and the South American mainland is the difference between Georgia and Maine. So we're saying it's more than 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles is really far for small birds, for small animals to get to. Plants, it's not that big of a deal. Plants, either the seeds can be carried on the wind, or they can float in the seawater to get there. Animals, on the other hand, animals have a much harder time. Obviously, birds can get there without that big of a problem, but any kind of a smaller animal, small birds, would have a hard time flying for more than 1,000 miles nonstop. And any kind of a lizard or any other smaller animals like that, almost impossible for them to make it that long journey. As we said, the Galapagos Islands are tropical islands off the coast of Ecuador. They're similar in climate to other tropical islands, but they are very unlike in climate the Ecuadorian mainland, again, the closest landmass. The life is similar to the living things that we see in Ecuador, not living things we see in other tropical climates. That's very important. What this implies is all of the things that live in the Galapagos, all of the living things, all the species that we find in the Galapagos, where did they probably come from? They came from Ecuador, which means that it's not that the life was just dotted around these tropical islands and it's all the same everywhere. It's that tropical islands, they're the animals, the plants and animals that make up the ecosystems on these places probably came from, the plants and animals came from the nearest large landmass. In this case, it is Ecuador. Darwin studied the geographic distribution of several different organisms, including marine iguanas and giant tortoises.